Mark Ratcliffe.
Joel Cliff. It's a pleasure to follow Adam Price, and I'm very interested in the perspective and the nuance of what he says, because it does seem to me there's clearly a range of views within his party and those who were previously part of it as to the appropriate extent of cooperation with the Labour government and the degree to which Plaid takes responsibility for this budget. When we started the process, I at least had the impression there was a transaction between Plaid and the Labour government, and in return for Plaid abstaining on the budget, the government would agree to a number of very specific measures that Plaid wanted, and that was the deal. But to listen to him speak now, he appears to take a far greater degree of responsibility, even pride, in the budget that is before us today, even if in the event his party is still to abstain. And he describes it as the sort of fruit of discussions between Plaid and Labour. But isn't the reality that the fruit of those discussions were a number of particular projects? We heard about a particular bypass and the prioritisation of that over perhaps other road schemes. But it wasn't, in the event, a deal on the overall budget. And this isn't, Plaid's budget to defend every part of, because you've only agreed to let it through in exchange for getting a series of specific things. And I think we would benefit from a greater degree of clarity about how much Plaid or particular individuals who may be spokesmen or other take responsibility. I give way.
I'm not sure if the honourable member was following me in that section of my speech, but I think I did say pretty clearly that we did not agree with everything in the budget, and indeed there were demands that we made as part of our discussions that were not met. So, we're very clear. We were able to improve the budget, but we are abstaining because we do not agree with the budget as a whole.
I mean, the member gave an example. He said that the future further funding for flood protection, and that was one of the prizes he would defend through this process. I mean, actually, there is some increase in the flood protection budget between this final budget and the draft budget, but the overall budget, I believe, for flood protection is still very significantly reduced. And yes, our Finance Committee has been listened to, and there has been some put back on the capital side to Leslie Griffith's budget, but there are still very significant reductions affecting what for signalling great virtue are described as climate change projects. But there are cuts there, and he talks about defending these further increases with pride, but that is not actually the situation if he looks at the full budget rather than the specifics of what you did. Well, I'm not quite sure that you did sort of, Adam, talking about this section here. You agreed a series of very specific things, which Labour then have to find money elsewhere to pay for what they've agreed to give you in order to abstain. And the largest single element of that, notably on the capital side, is those reductions to climate change projects. And I think you need to recognise that rather than like to claim support for the things you appreciate but not for others. However, I do recognise what you say and what Simon said in terms of a move to what was, I think Simon said, was a more parliamentary process of a fully amendable finance bill. Of course, in the Westminster Parliament, the finance bill solely deals with tax, and that will, even next year, remain a fairly modest amount of what we do. And the key criterion for me is whether the spending side of this budget is going to be amendable, and in particular, we've had some of our comments in Finance Committee listened to, and I appreciate that, but will there be an opportunity to amend spending lines of the budget in Finance Committee where at least notionally we have an opposition majority? We have some changes. The Finance Minister spoke about the 46 million increase in revenue spending between the draft budget and the final budget. He described that as coming primarily from reserves. I'm not quite clear how he assesses it that way, given between the draft and the final budget we had an increase in 23.4 million in revenue spending available from the UK government through the autumn statements. That's slightly over half of the increase he now has in the revenue, so I'm not clear that that does come from reserves. Some of what that's been spent on, 10 million for the business rate relief, and some of the big increases being mitigated there. I just wonder whether we could perhaps indicate more clearly in advance through evaluations as to what businesses would be required to have. I particularly welcome the £6 million for the homelessness prevention. I know there's a number of other items that feed through to local government that was given a broadly flat budget before, and my worry still is that there are severe cuts coming in the local government area, but that the government has found it politic to put those off until after the local elections. Note the further changes in capital budgets. We're going to have another 7 million for roads next year, and then 83 million over the course of the 4-year period on capital. That sum, of course, is swamped by the amount of money that Welsh Government would put into the black route, estimated at £1.1 billion plus. I just make a final appeal, couldn't we consider that money better spent on the cheaper, but I think faster, more deliverable version of the blue route, and look at putting that very large sum of capital to other projects that might give quicker and more appropriate returns across Wales.